Okay, then I'll make a start. And I'm sure more people will join us as we go in. So my name's John Dean. I'm from Sheffield Hallam University, and I'm part of the VSSN steering group. For those of you who don't know me, I'm going to be a very, very hands-off chair in this session that's meant to introduce you to the VSSN's journal, Voluntary Sector Review, which has been going, I think, 11 years now, published 3 times a year and free to all members of the VSSN, which I'll put a link to. If you're not a member of the VSSN, it's something that you should sign up straight away. Membership starts from £35. I'll put a link in the chat box now, but I'm going to hand straight over to one of the journal's editors, James Rees, who can give you a more thorough introduction to the journal and what this editor's section is going to be about.
Thanks very much, John, and thank you to all your efforts today. Your comparing role, it's been fantastic, and to everyone, it's been hopefully a real success the first day so far. I'm sure everyone's feeling probably a little bit zoomed out by now. I know it's been quite a long day, and it's difficult, I think, to know quite who's out there. So I think this session is limited to 100 people. Whether we have 100 people or not, I have no idea. It's very hard to judge who's out there in the audience. I guess if we were face to face in the kind of normal situation, I'd be waving one of these in your face. This is my business card for VSR. I don't know if you can see that, just about. Thrusting one in your hand, trying to encourage you to think about submitting to VSR, or just to raise awareness of VSR. And I guess all of us here, we're just here, I guess, to promote the journal, but also to do something, you know, fairly informal today, just to have a conversation, and really partly to, so as I say, partly to introduce the journal, say a bit more about it, maybe demystify the process of kind of submitting voluntary sector review to a certain extent. But also to take any of your questions, and there's no question is too small or too daft. Just, you know, feel free to ask us questions. We've set aside maybe the last half hour of the session to ask a question. So what we're going to do essentially is divide up between us some sort of basic introduction to the journal. I'm going to talk later about some of the, I guess, more kind of practical side of submitting to the journal, and some sort of kind of process issues, maybe, as I say, maybe kind of just demystifying the whole process if I can, and say a little bit more about how things within the journal work and how we sort things out between us. It is quite a big team of people that work on the journal, as you can probably see from the panel in front of you. But first, I'm going to pass to Carl Milofsky, who's currently the managing editor of VSR. So essentially, what we do is take it in turns to be managing editor, usually for about 2 years, and that's a way of kind of prioritizing the kind of workload amongst us, and we take it in turns to do that. So it's Carl's turn to do that, and it means essentially that Carl has kind of ultimate authority about what goes into each issue, and makes the decisions about the running order, and it's essentially kind of the executive role for a period of time. And as I say, I will take that on in maybe a year's time, and then after that it will pass to Daiga, who's our third most recent recruit to the editorial team. And that also means very much that we have a kind of rotating team, and ultimately we'll take it in turns to step down, and other people will join that team, and it's seemingly, you know, so far working really, really well to do it that way. So I'm going to pass on to Carl now, who's maybe going to talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll take it from there, really. So over to you, Carl.
I just bought a clock so I can actually watch how far behind I am. So my name is Carl Milofsky. I teach at a place called Bucknell University, which is in the middle of Pennsylvania in the US. And I have a long history in our NOVA, which is, you know, a number of you have been there. People tend to think of it a little bit more as sort of an American-based association, but I have edited NBSQ. And on the board of our NOVA, so, you know, I'm an old horse where American nonprofits are concerned. You know, seeing Marilyn Taylor out there and some other UK friends, I also, turns out I've been over there a lot, done a few things, and so it's not actually, I applied to be an editor because Nick Atchison was a previous editor, and he and I were friends from my work in Northern Ireland, and we'd written together, and I thought, good, it'll be good to hang out with Nick, except he retired. So now we have these other people. So we have, I want to just, you know, James kind of introduced the other editors, James Rees, and I'm still Daiga Kamerade. I don't know if it's, is that emphasis over the A, mean that it's a long A? It could be Kamerade. We're still, we don't use last names much. I would say in terms of what James said, even though I'm the managing editor for this period of time, we really are a very collaborative group. We talk about almost everything together. We should we say lost Robert Millen? I don't mean lost, sounds like kind of fatal. But he was one of the editors for 5 years and was very involved in all the operational details of running the journal. And I think that one of the reasons we need to rotate and coordinate is because there are enough details in the journal that it's easy not to know what's going on. And so we're trying to share organizational intelligence. I want to just make a few comments about nonprofit journals. My general impression is that the number of people writing papers about the voluntary sector has been increasing pretty substantially over the last 10 years. I think we are partly a beneficiary of this. I'll talk in a minute about trying to get indexed, which I think is holding us back a little bit. But it's a context where right now we're in I think a really strong position where we are expanding the number of papers we are getting, the number of papers that we're publishing, and so that's kind of where we're at. Let me just go into some comments up here. I don't want to get off my script. As James said, we do have 3 editors. We are appointed, I think we're appointed, not elected, for 3-year terms. But one of the things we've done is we've sort of moved voluntarily to take 5-year terms. And the reason for that, a lot has to do with this managing editor rotation. James and I were both on 3-year terms, and when Rob left, one of us had to be the managing editor. I was a year senior to James, and originally we were going to do it for a year, and I think both of us were kind of frightened at the prospect of having taken it on. It takes at least a year to figure out what's going on and to get to know people, especially if you're way out in left field like I am, where, it gives us then as a group that has an internal structure, and I, only recently become part of that. So taking time to learn what's going on is important. So what we're doing is we spend a year or 2 years kind of in the sort of learning phase. So we take over the managing editor role for 2 years, and then when you vacate that role, you still have a year to kind of help the transition for the next person. And that I'm in my first, I guess my first year as managing editor, and at the end of 2021, I guess I'll pass it on to James. The other thing we've done, so one of our, while the general volume of papers being produced for voluntary sector journals has been going up, our journal, we're just finishing our 10th year. So there's going to be an editorial describing the 10 years in the next issue. And we went through a period probably 5 years ago where something's happened in terms of research funding in the UK that kind of damped down the flow of papers. And I think the editing group before us did a great job of keeping the journal going over that kind of lean time. Peter Halfpenny, kind of as the founder of the journal, one of the founders of the journal, kind of looking over the thing, talks about other journals that failed, and he's kind of surprised and pleased that we haven't failed. And I think in addition, we've gotten to be in a strong position. We're clearly growing, we're clearly getting stronger, we clearly have a future, and really it's, our challenge is to get up to the next level. But one of the ways we've moved to do that is we've appointed 2 regional associate editors. We have Georg von Schnurbein, who's director of the Center for Philanthropy Studies at Universität Basel, and also Lily Wang, who's a graduate program director in the School of Community Resources and Development at Arizona State University. So Georg is kind of our person who's looking for papers and attending conferences, on our behalf in Europe. And Lily has, this much smaller area. She's got Asia and North America, but she's an old hand again in our NOVA. We're kind of connecting that piece. And she's also, one of the things we've been doing is we've started soliciting, publishing themed or special issues in voluntary sector review. That's one of the things that has helped us build up our stock of papers. We're just publishing one on sustainability. We have another coming on place leadership. Then John Dean is editing a special issue on qualitative research with a critical perspective. And so Lily and Sharik, the last name, who was executive director at Nova, are doing a special issue on Muslim traditions in civil society. So that'll be coming out, a year down the road. And both of these issues seem to produce a lot of interest among people and increase the flow of submissions, and that's stronger for us. So in terms of our general goals, I told you a little bit about the journal and where we're at. We've been doing a fair amount of strategic planning. Rob McMillan sort of did the first wave of this with the policy press people. And some of the things are fairly basic. We aim to provide a high quality peer-reviewed journal that emphasizes strong theory, qualitative research, and applied and policy discussions. I think there are some important pieces of that. I would say the theory and qualitative research focus is one of the things that in people's mind maybe distinguishes us from a journal like NVSQ, which people perceive at least to be more quantitative. And I think that's not strictly true, but I think, in sort of in general terms, people think of it that way. I think the other piece is we aim to be the leading theoretical journal in the voluntary sector in Europe. Again, I would say in terms of contrast, as an American and our Nova person with a lot of European and UK friends, people always complain that our Nova is way too US focused, and that themes of interest in Europe don't come up enough, aren't emphasized enough. Part of that is having our Nova is, perceived maybe a little bit politically conservative, where people from Europe prefer to be a little bit more, have a little bit more of a critical perspective. And those things are really important. I think they're things that define our journal. And so, one of the things, I don't know, I'm kind of looking at my list here, one of the things we've really tried to do is become more international, but I think one of the balancing issues we're working on is also being a European journal or a UK focused journal. And I think the UK focus you see a lot because we have quite a bit of UK oriented policy writing in the journal. And quite a few of the papers are kind of based on data collection in the UK. But we've also, if you look at VSR, we also have a lot more material that's international and from all over the world. And that is one of the things that we really work to do. I would say one other thing that's really important is that we as editors really aim to be in dialogue with authors. I think this is somewhat in contrast to some of the other journals. I don't mean to be critical of them because they're all my buddies, but a journal like NVSQ is getting 500 submissions a year. And Chao Guo, who's the editor, just managing that volume of paper means that he has to be somewhat more impersonal about how he runs the journal. We're at a lower volume, and we try to be, if authors want to find out what's going on with their papers, or if they want to talk about contents, we try to give a very thoughtful, critical response to the contents of papers. We get reviewers who I think pretty consistently write very detailed, thoughtful, pretty highly expert responses to papers. And so I think we give people very strong feedback. I think the editors work with them. And I think part of the reason we're in a strong position in terms of having enough papers to publish is that people then revise and resubmit their papers, and the papers get a lot better, and then they get published. So I think we have a good track record of holding on to papers that are submitted. And I think we, the kind of, I don't know, the sort of social worker aspect of editing is one of the strengths. And I think it's something that all of us editors and historically editors have agreed on. One of the things about, where am I on my list here? One of the major things that we've been pushing for is to get indexed. And So we're currently in something called the Emerging Sources Citation Index, which allows us to be tracked on the Web of Science. And in the next year, the journal will be eligible for evaluation for the Social Science Citation Index. We talk a lot to the publishers about this. And part of our push to become more international comes because the publishers think a more internationalized content would make a stronger case for us to get into the Social Science Citation Index. The other thing that we are, as the number of submissions we get increases, whether you like it or not, one of the things that's going to happen is it's going to be more competitive to get into the journal. I think our judgment is that the papers we publish now are all strong and well thought out and on interesting topics, but I think we're going to get into a place in the next year or two where we have to start saying, well, gee, we have this strong paper and that strong paper. Which one is going to get in? And I think that is going to do two things. One is it'll make the journal more competitive, but hopefully also we'll publish more papers that get widely cited. And of course, being widely cited is one of the key things that gets you into the citation index. So now I'm going to pass it on to James. Are you there, James? I think
I will unmute myself. I think I've achieved that.
I
So Carl's done exactly what I hoped he would do, which is cover almost everything. So that leaves me with very little to say. So thank you very much, Carl. I just wanted to add a few things. As I said, I promised I would say a little bit more about the kind of process, and I think Carl actually has covered a great deal of that. I just wanted to kind of emphasise that, traditionally the aim of VSR has been to publish articles that cover issues across the voluntary sector, civil society, all of the kind of issues we've heard about today already. Volunteering, another really big theme of VSI in recent years, particularly around volunteering. And we continue to get submissions on that, particularly from the US, interestingly. So it's not just the voluntary sector, it's not just the voluntary sector, even though that is obviously in the name of the journal. And also, as Carl has been discussing, we've always been, I guess, perceived as a UK-based journal, and obviously there's a lot of truth in that. But internationalisation has been quite an important part of what we've been doing. As Carl said, before we three became editors, it's been an agenda for quite a few years now that all of the board has signed up to. So we aspire, I guess, to being increasingly an international journal, but I don't think we'll ever lose that sense of being, kind of rooted in the UK and rooted in Europe. I'm very aware, actually, that this audience here today is quite international, and so I want to kind of emphasise that, really, to say that we are here as a journal that does aspire to cover issues across the world, and just to reach out to people there and to reassure them that that is, something that we will aim to do and continue to aim to do. The other thing I think I do genuinely think sets us apart as a journal and is kind of rooted in the DNA of VSR, I think, is the kind of process that we've all adopted as editors, and it's partly why there are three of us, to be able to kind of work as a team and divide work up between us. There's the three kind of core editors, but also editors for different parts of the journal. We have policy and practice editors who, as we've already introduced, Alison and Chris, who cover that part of the journal, and they will be hopefully saying a word or two later or taking questions. And I'll come back to the policy and practice section in a second. As I say, rooted through all of that is this kind of ethos of being supportive and encouraging people to submit to the journal, whether that's people who are maybe a more advanced stage of their career, but also for early career researchers and indeed PhD students and others, and also additionally people who are not necessarily rooted within the academic or situated within the academic setting. We've always been a journal that's open to people making submissions from elsewhere, from policy and practice, kind of outlined. So I guess that, as editors, we see that process as being, right from when people submit papers, and when papers come into us, we kind of tend to have a look at them quite carefully. As editors, maybe discuss papers between us. Sometimes we enter into dialogue with authors. If the paper comes in and it's not quite there, it's not quite ready, we might have a dialogue about how to get that particular piece into a submittable or get it to a stage where we can send it out to review. That's something we do quite regularly. And we try to support authors throughout the process of submission, and often, as many people know, through resubmission. We completely acknowledge that it can be quite a long process. can be quite a frustrating process, and we know that as editors, we know that as you know, we are authors too, and we're submitting to journals quite regularly. We're also aware that it can be quite a long, drawn-out process. It can be frustrating. It can be tiresome, and as I say, we can't be there all the time, and we acknowledge that the process is slow sometimes, but we do our best to be supportive to authors. I think that's something that's really, as I said, really important part of the identity of the journal. I've said already, hinted already, that the policy and practice too is something that we see as quite a unique part of the journal. It's always been there since the founding of the journal. We stressed it in our 10-year editorial that we've just been producing over the last few weeks. We did make the decision a few years ago to merge the policy and practice sections of the journal. That was partly because we recognised that we weren't, you know, at that phase at least, we weren't getting huge numbers of submissions. I think that reflects the fact that it's actually quite difficult often for people who sit outside of academia to submit, work on papers, get them up to the required standard, and to be able to stick with that process that, as I've said, can be quite long, drawn out, and tiresome. But we've always wanted to have that space in the journal. In merging it, we were also kind of working out how best to kind of manage that process. And I think in Chris and Ali, we've got a really good team, really committed to that part of the journal, and it seems to be working well. So we definitely will continue to stick with that part of the journal. It's really important for us. I think I've probably said enough. I will pass to Daiga, who's got a few reflections on other bits and pieces of the work we've been doing, bits and pieces of our plans for the forthcoming years. And maybe has some reflections on her first year as was not even a year yet, is it, Daiga? You started in January, I think. So as our latest recruit to the team, perhaps might have some interesting reflections about where the journal's going as she sees it at this stage. So over to Daiga.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Carl. And thank you everybody for joining this session today, and I'm very pleased to say that you will be the first ones to hear about our new exciting experimental initiatives that we are trialing at Voluntary Sector Review. Very shortly we will put out a call for research notes on COVID-19 and voluntary sector, and research notes is a relatively newish type of publication, which are like short to medium length papers between 2,000 and 4,000 words. So why we're doing that is that the pandemic has altered many aspects of societies, including a voluntary sector. There have been furloughs, job losses, changes in volunteering and helping in the dating behavior. There's, on one hand, there's a need for up-to-date evidence or improved theoretical understanding of how pandemic has affected voluntary sector. But on the other hand, doing scientific research and publishing a full paper can take a long time. So we decided that to address this contradiction, to sort of propose a solution for that contradiction, we will experiment with research notes, a new form of publication. So we invite you and any other scholars to submit some short research notes on your ongoing research related to COVID-19 and voluntary sector. And we know that there's lots of exciting research going on, including by people who are present in this session and who presented this morning. So we are looking for research notes with promising empirical research findings, as well as theoretical discussions that help to understand how pandemic has affected sector, what could be potential consequences of it. And we seek research notes that make a very clear and original contribution. Although they are shorter than full papers, we still expect them to make some kind of original contribution. Just to think about, just to give you some examples, what the research note could be. It could be some intriguing initial findings, or some findings that are time sensitive. For example, if we want to see how volunteering or donating has changed in recent six months or so, a research note could also advance a new idea. It might not be new theoretical framework or model, but just initial ideas. It could be new theoretical perspective or methodological approach. For example, doing voluntary sector research during the lockdown and social distancing, how you approach it. You could describe your experience and provide some advice to other researchers. Or maybe you want to talk about new data you have collected during this period and would be very happy to share with other researchers, maybe as part of a collaboration. We also would welcome some research that's very difficult to publish. For example, something that finds non-significant results to address publication bias. So that's a brief description of what we're looking for. Submission deadline will be October 30th, so 1.5 months' time. And this is because we want to publish a collection of research notes early next year. We're looking on March issue. We're planning to have a selection of 3 to 5 research notes, but if there is higher demand, and we hope there will be, we then will also include research notes in next following issues. Research notes will be peer-reviewed, but it will be fast-track peer review. So the requirements for a research note are not the same as a full paper. For example, literature review can be fairly basic, addressing that only the key issues. Methods section only just enough to judge how rigorous a study has been. And my advice would be focus on one key message that you want to get across. What is your most exciting idea, most interesting, most time relevant finding? Don't try to get too much into one research note. They're short, they should be straight to the point. Your contribution should be explicit. I think we are very happy to answer the questions if you have about this new exciting initiative. And if this goes very well, we might carry it on when to address other contemporary issues in the voluntary sector.
Daiga.
Yeah.
So that call for papers will be coming out very soon. How will you be telling people about it?
Oh, we're planning to publish on VSSN website.
Okay, so everyone should be a member of the VSSN, or at least looking at the VSSN website and the discussion list, the JISC mail list that is free to sign up to.
Yeah.
It's a very good place to stay on top of VSR.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming within next week. It will be published.
Okay, and the deadline for papers will be the 31st of October.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Ali and Chris.
Does Chris or Ali want to say a few words, or should we just launch into questions? I don't mind it.
Chris disappeared. No,
I guess just to say briefly, the process for practice papers is exactly the same as for normal papers. We send it out to 2 or 3 people for peer review. We try and get a practitioner peer review from at least one practitioner to peer review it. They are slightly shorter than normal research articles, but we want them to be academically informed about policy or practice relevant. They could be based on research that's happening within practice or analysis of prescient policy issues and things like that. And I suggest anyone that has an idea for a practice paper that they want to think about, more than happy to have a kind of an email dialogue about it before people submit formally.
Ali, did you have anything to say about what you're looking for in policy and practice papers?
I sort of re-emphasise what Chris is saying, that we're Very happy to work with authors, particularly practitioners as well, who are maybe thinking in kind of academic terms and wanting to contribute something and drawing on their practice and experience, but maybe worried about submitting to an academic journal. And yeah, very happy to work with and read papers first of all, and give some feedback to encourage some of those practice papers to come through.
One thing I'd add is if you're, particularly if you're an early career researcher or kind of wanting to publish from your PhD, it can be a good way to get experience of the publication process without necessarily having to, even though it's rigorous, I think it's a slightly more kind of supportive and maybe less bruising sometimes approach to publication. So I think it's a good option to think about if you want to get that experience.
Just to add to that as well, I meant to say earlier that another way that people gain access, I guess, and experience with journals is to volunteer to be a reviewer. We're always on the lookout for reviewers, and we're very dependent on their kind of contribution to the journal. We're really thankful to those people who do review for us, and some people do it really regularly. But a really good way to get involved in the journal, that's certainly as an initial starting point, is through reviewing. So if you want to get involved, just email any of us and we'll add you to the list. I'd be hugely appreciative too.
And that includes book reviewers as well. So the book reviews editor, Eddie Hogg, has always got several books that he's looking for people to read and review in about 600 words for the journal. Okay, great. Angela.
I was going to say, James, could you share one of your email addresses on the chat function of the best person to get in contact if people do want to volunteer to review? Who's the best one of you to contact? Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So we've got no questions as yet directly on the chat function that haven't already been asked, but if people can please share your questions on the chat function, we can then you can then unmute yourself, or we can ask the questions for you. So please do put your questions in. So someone is asking, so Tracy is asking anyone, how do you go about getting your book reviewed? So instead of reviewing a book for other people, how, if you're writing a book and you want to get a review of that book included in the journal, what's the process for that?
I'll jump in. I'll answer that one. The best way to do that is to contact Eddie Hogg directly. Very easy. And I'll add his email address to the chat in a minute.
Brilliant. So Eddie Hogg is the book review editor. So yeah, James, if you can put that email address in there, that would be great as well. Thank you.
Yes, and follow both VSR and VSSN on Twitter as well. That's a very good place, because Eddie often takes pictures and shares all the books that he's got out to review, and so that's a very good place to get in touch with him. I have a question for the editors that I saw asked at a panel once and thought, oh, that's a really good question. I'll steal that if ever I need it. So the question is, if you could have any article submitted to the journal, what would you want submitted? What's the topic you think is missing in voluntary sector studies that really needs someone to investigate?
Good question.
I'll let you go. Carl, go on then.
Well, John and I have a back and forth on what we mean by theory, and I think there are a lot of topics in sort of what we call theoretical themes where the focus might be a little different in Europe than in America. So I'm always kind of in the market for that. I'm reading a book now, so trying to, before I muted my microphone, reading a book on social media, and I think that we get papers on that, but I think we don't have really deep, thorough studies on that thing, and I think it's very important. I'm always in the market for papers from, I call it the global South, sort of development papers. I think we have challenges with that because it's hard to sometimes find reviewers, but I think that a lot of the most innovative and creative issues are in thinking is in that area. It's kind of my list.
Thanks, Carl. Ali, you're not muted, so I'll ask you next.
I'm happy to contribute to this one, actually, especially in terms from a practice paper point of view. I'd really welcome particularly some papers that were around kind of participatory action research with communities, with voluntary sector organisations, and collaboratively produced. I think we get some fantastic papers that are on communities and about those organisations, but actually some of that, I think the practice section offers a really good space to have some of that more participatory research methodologies coming through.
Great, thank you. Daiga?
We just had a great presentation from Groundswell in our last section, which I thought would be great for that, around sort of working with people who are homeless over COVID.
Maybe I should go and contact them and ask them if they'll think about putting in something. Thank you.
As a volunteering researcher, I would say we are in their need for research that focuses on negative effects of volunteering, not only positive effects. We have this strong social bias that volunteering is positive, but it could lead to burnout. There's conflict, there's role conflict and many other things, but it seems that there's a blind spot on volunteering research which covers negative outcomes. So I would like to see more papers on that.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I guess the reflection I had from the session I was involved in last around communities and mutual aid is that we're really begging out for a kind of a new up-to-date discussion about the relationship between mutual aid and where it sits within our understanding of the voluntary sector, particularly within a UK context, but also thinking about how that might compare across other jurisdictions. And I think given that there's lots of research going on around mutual aid at the moment, including participatory action research, there's some real potential there to kind of get some new debate and discussion going.
Yes. And it was interesting in that last session about how different people were interpreting the term quite differently, and where those overlaps sit and how it should sit, perhaps even. James?
Yeah, thanks. The trend I've noticed in recent years is I guess a reduction of papers being submitted around organisations and within organisation studies, case studies sometimes. And I think interestingly, we addressed this point in the 10-year editorial that you will hopefully see in the next few weeks. I think it reflects the kind of, what's the best way to put it? I guess the working down of TSRC. So TSRC, Third Sector Research Centre, was funded until 2014. After that, it wasn't receiving ESRC funding anymore, and I guess it's kind of got smaller since then. There was a whole raft of work being done at TSRC on the organisational basis of the sector, some quite big studies, and I think we've seen fewer papers along those lines being submitted in recent years, and I think that's a shame. I think it would be nice to see more papers addressing some of the key kind of theoretical and empirical challenges on that part of the third sector, which is important, and I think that's partly why we've seen more submissions around volunteering, and as Daiga said, that's possibly of a particular type of study. So yeah, that would be my kind of plea. Perhaps echoing what Tracy said this morning, that there is a lot of work still to be done about structures, governance, power within third sector organisations. I think that's particularly apparent in the UK. And again, it goes back to that point about the international agenda. We're perceived as being still, I guess, a UK-based journal, whereas a lot of people perhaps working on these sorts of issues in the US would automatically go to MBSQ, perhaps. So I think we're beginning to break down those barriers. But yeah,
and as Tracy has written in the comments, the challenge for organisational scholars with VSR is business schools' obsession with rankings and metrics rather than appropriateness, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
If there are any more questions, please keep them coming in the chat box. I think looking more practically for people who are thinking of submitting paper for the first time as editors, what are the absolute yeses and absolute nos that when a paper comes in and you go, right, this is great, this does everything, or what are the classic mistakes that authors make that lead to their papers to not being successful? What advice would you be giving to people in that context?
Well, kind of simple and basic thing. Because we get authors from all over the world, there is an issue about English, and I think authors need to find ways of having people carefully proofread their submissions, and as editors, I know Nick Atchison, that's one of the things that frustrated him was that as an aspect. I'd say also, I mean, I tend to pay attention to whether whatever it is that the paper is doing is clearly stated at the beginning, and then follow through on going through the paper. And I think that kind of internal organization of the narrative is one of the things that we work on hard with authors.
Okay. Thank you. Daiga?
Two things. One thing is to remember that we are an international journal. We have international readership. So if you're doing single country study, or you have to be explicit first about providing enough detail for an international reader to understand why something that's going on in this country is interesting, relevant to them as well, and also provide some kind of even brief comparative overview, like can we observe this somewhere else, or this is particular phenomenon that happens just in this particular place and country, but how does it inform understanding of what's happening somewhere else? That was my first. And second is, I'm always looking for a contribution, explicitly stated contribution. What gap is this research addressing, or what contradiction it is addressing, and how we should change your thinking about reading your study about this particular issue. So what has changed after you've done your study in our understanding of what you've been studying? And I know myself as an author, it's so obvious when you write it, but when people read, if it's not stated explicitly, it's very difficult sometimes to identify what a contribution is. So it should be stated explicitly. This is how it should change after we have done our study.
Thank you. James?
Not a great deal to add to that, except to say that, yeah, sometimes we receive papers that look fairly strong, but it's hard not to be put off by, small errors like not following basic formatting, missing out chunks of references, sort of howling typos, that kind of thing. So it does sound a bit of a small sort of stylistic thing, but please look at the instructions to authors that is quite prominent on our website, and just follow the basic rules of submission. To be honest, it's quite common that people do seem as if they've done it in a bit of a slapdash way, and it is quite off-putting, and it's off-putting as a reviewer as well. So yeah, do take the time. This applies to any journal you'd ever submit to. Just take the time to follow the basic formatting things. We do that because it does make it much easier for for reviewers and editors to parse it, and to be able to read it clearly, and to get a strong sense of what the author's actually trying to say. So yeah, it sounds like a small thing, but it's quite important, and first impressions do count, as we know.
Mm-hmm. Just to add to James's comment, it's particular, but pages do need to be numbered, please. It's so difficult for a viewer to say somewhere down the paper, line who knows where, there is a typo. So we do need page numbers, please.
Just to highlight, there's been a question in response to those comments, which I think is one to raise in terms of if the focus is on formatting, isn't it better to worry about the formatting after a paper has been accepted, as long as it's kind of internally consistent within a paper? So I don't know if one of you wanted to respond to that particular.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So just to stress, it's not about final formatting or typesetting or anything like that at all. It's simply presenting a clear manuscript. It's not whether this double spaced or 1.5 spaced or anything like that. We're not being obsessive about ultimate formatting. It's just we want to see papers that are well presented and easy to read, or as easy to read as possible. I mean, I'm afraid to say, I have to read a lot of papers on screens, and when you get one that's really badly formatted and difficult to read, it's just off-putting, and it's hard to get to essential content and the message that the author's trying to get across.
You
So,
know,
yeah, I do agree with Silke's point.
one of the things that happens when a paper is sent in is it goes through something called a technical review. And this is actually not done by us, but by our editorial assistant, who I should have gotten to be here today, Lena Hinn, who's been terrific. And it includes things like, you know, you need to anonymize your paper. You know, so if you have lots of references to yourself or lots of things that will be identified that, you know, they really have to be taken out. And one of the things that happens in the technical review, if somebody's going to write back, is so you have to do this. I'd say the other thing that I find kind of frustrating is if references in the article aren't in the bibliography, because, you know, I mean, I get interested in the paper. I want to know who these people are that you're citing, and if they're not there, it's frustrating, but it also is saying, you know, somebody's been a little bit not careful about the paper. My wife, who's an English teacher, you know, looks at college student papers and sort of likes to say, you know, do you really want people to think you're in junior high school? And I suppose there's a little bit of that here. You know, I mean, if you want people to think well of your paper, you should just be careful, you know, and follow the format. It's not that, as James says, that we're uptight. I would also say we're fairly relaxed about length, which people worry about a lot. You know, we're in a place where we still have, you know, some flexibility about length. We're looking at the number of pages per journal and the number of pages per year. And if we're on, and we've found that Policy Press is actually pretty flexible. So if we have somebody who has a longer paper, you know, they're pretty flexible about letting us put it in without cutting out other stuff. So I think that's a, you know, that's a big positive for this journal compared to some others.
Okay, thank you. So we've got the
hello, can I please, if you still have places, sign up for the Open Doors tour on Sunday at 3 p.m. for members?
I think that someone might have their microphone on. I think they're on mute, and then so it's worth checking. There's a question there about article lengths, just following on from those discussions there. So someone asked for the length of the policy and practice sessions, which has been answered, but maybe a follow-up question about thinking about the length, the differences of a full article length, of research notes. Can you just tell us a little bit more about those differences between, I guess, all the different sections, the main research articles, the policy and practice section, and now the kind of research notes? Can you tell us a little bit more about the difference between those different sections, please?
Mm-hmm. I will take that. About research notes, what you cut down will depend what kind of research note you are submitting. Like, for example, if it's a description of new data sets that you're happy to share and collaborate on, obviously you don't need that much literature review or theoretical context. You will focus mostly on a methodology and description of the data set itself. And equal, if it's a theoretical paper, there will be very little methodology in comparison. I think that the bottom line is what information I have to provide to make my message reliable. So when somebody reads these 2,000 to 4,000 words, what do I need? What information I need to provide them with? So they say, well, there's rigorous research under that, and I believe what they say is that what they have done. And it makes valuable contribution. We're still experimenting with it, so I can't be more specific. We haven't learned, and research notes are not that common in journals. So I would say you have quite free reins there, what you cut down. Just think about it. What support do I need for my arguments that I'm making in the paper on a contribution I want to highlight, and include that. I hope that helps. If not, I think we are open to discuss. If you're considering submitting it and not sure, just send me a message. We can have a look on a draft or answer your questions when you have.
I would say we have one research note that was submitted, and one of the things was that people, you know, my editor partners who read it couldn't understand the context of where this paper came from, you know, because it was an American paper and they didn't know the research background, that sort of thing. So I think a research note you know, it's again something that Daiga was saying about international papers. You have to explain a little bit about where you're coming from. And I think also that if there's the history of research, this particular piece is by somebody who's produced a lot of research in that particular area, and you know, it might not be known over here. So I think some references to that case are what I've seen. I mean, I've felt that, you know, NVSQ publishes research notes, so that's why you know, this is an important thing for me. I've gotten some papers where there's a new sort of survey that has become available that can be used for certain things, and some people write papers where they're sort of test driving the, you know, the results from that paper. But I would say also that if you're looking at it from a broader literature standpoint, you can't quite figure out what the point is. And I think that if you're just trying to, you know, tell people that these data exist, if you're trying to try out a new technique and you're still trying to figure out what it means, all of those kinds of things are things for me that fit into research notes. I think it's important that you have to tell people why they should care. But I think, you know, like this one paper I was talking about is kind of very fast turnaround research from a center that has a huge research operation going, so they could churn out new research very fast, and it's partly important to let people know that it's, you know, that this data set is available and people can get access to it. So I think research notes are kind of, a lot of them are kind of that way.
James, I see you've written in the comments about the commentary pieces. So we've got full articles, we've got policy and practice articles, there's research notes, and there's commentary pieces as well.
Yeah, it's probably best if Chris Dayson does something about that. It was something that was generated by discussion within that part of the journal.
Yeah, I think the formal name for them is comment and debate pieces, and it's about giving people the opportunity and space to comment on developments that they might see as affecting the sector in a way that isn't as kind of, maybe not as academically rigorous as a formal research article, and it might be more topical, and you might want to get your kind of your points out there more quickly. There's an opportunity to do that in a formal journal. A number of other journals do this, and they tend to be quite topical and quite highly cited pieces. So we're trying to get that moving as well. And as James has said, Rob's piece on implications of COVID for voluntary sector research was our first attempt at this.
Thanks, Chris. Are there any subjects that you think other commentary or debate pieces that people might want to write, or you might like to read or edit?
I guess there's lots of topics coming out of this conference that people might want to reflect on as a start point, because obviously we're thinking about the key is that we make them topical. So some of the conversations I've heard around mutual aid, for example, have been really interesting. Some of the ways that people are having to rethink kind of the role of volunteering and the bureaucracy around volunteering have been fascinating as well. So lots of scope at the moment, I think, to do things like that. Also, if anyone wants to do this, when the Kruger review does come out, I think that'll be rich pickings for somebody as well.
Perhaps someone could pick up Daiga's point about looking at the negative side of volunteering. It might be just a point, you know, someone wants to make a very quick provocation around that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no final questions, and I think it's been a long day for everybody, so maybe we'll draw it to close there. I'm sure all the VSR editors are more than happy to answer questions, and you can find all their details online, or contact the conference organisers, or look at the VSR website. It's a perfect way to get in touch with people. If you've got ideas for an articles and you want to send in an abstract or a couple of lines about what you'd like to write about, or what evidence you've collected, I'm sure they'll be willing to offer feedback. And look out for the COVID rapid response section that's going to be coming out very soon, because I think that given what we've listened to today and two plenaries and 2 panels, I think it's an exciting time for people to be getting research out there quickly that's of benefit to charities as they continue to deal with the crisis. So we will see you all, hopefully bright and breezy, tomorrow at 10 a.m. for our second plenary, featuring speakers from NCVO, SCVO, Islamic World Relief, and BVSC. And then there'll be more panels throughout the day and a book launch at the end of the day. Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.